Hey Hermits, welcome back to my channel. My name is Dara and today I'm going to be diving in to the Contradictions Book Tag. Now, I like to think that I am a walking contradiction. I always have been. I'm definitely many things all at once, many of which sort of fight against each other. I've always thought that it's my Gemini brain, like I have all of these different interests and different personality quirks that often do battle with each other. So I do feel like this tag was made for me. I have the questions up here, so if you see me glancing over there, I'm not ignoring you, that's what's going on. I believe that this tag was created originally by Only for a Page, so I will link to that original video in the description box so that you can hop over, leave the creator some love and maybe follow along with their booktube adventures. But let's dive in to the first prompt. So I love this genre, but I didn't like this. I love romance. I love my romance, but I did not love Fixo Up by Tessa Bailey, which I read relatively recently, and it's actually made me so deeply uninterested in picking up any other Tessa Bailey books. Like, I just honestly could not care less. And I know that her most recent books, the What Happened One Summer and Hook, Line and Sinker, is that right? They're like super hyped and super popular and everyone's talking about them, but I'm just very like not interested. I didn't like that book. No. And what I was just about to say is maybe I just don't like traditionally published romance anymore. But actually the other example is an indie romance, so that doesn't quite fly, because the other book that I didn't enjoy at all, despite it being a romance, was Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. And this is another one that is so hyped. People seem to love this book. And why? Why? It took me multiple attempts to read this. So the first time I DNF'd it after like 4 pages, and I never do that. But the second time I pushed through, and it was just, how can I put this? Sloppy. It was sloppy. The writing style itself could have used a good edit. Just everything could have been injected with a little bit more like human 3D interest. It just was, it wasn't it. And I genuinely cannot figure out how and why people are saying, number one, that Tessa Bailey is the best romance writer alive, and also that Spanish Love Deception is the best romance ever written. Like, those two statements boggle my brain. And this is not to cast any shade at the authors. Obviously, everyone has different tastes, and that's what makes the publishing industry work, because if everyone was just interested in the same things, it wouldn't run. Like, nothing would happen, nothing would sell, or well, only the same things would sell all the time. But I just think that if people are calling out these two as like the best of all time, because that's a bold statement, then they're just not being exposed to a wide enough variety of authors and books, because objectively they're not the best of all time. Like, I don't think these books should be burned, even though I didn't personally enjoy them, but they're not the best of all time. Another genre that I love is anything like home improvement-y, like anything to do with cleaning or nesting or like feng shuiing your house, DIYing your house, anything like that. I love. Hello, that hermit life. Like, I'm very much about being inside my home. But I did not like the home edit life. I talked about this elsewhere recently. I can't remember where. Like, I've had a rant about this recently. But the home edit life, oh, I remember, it was when I was tier ranking my 2021 books. That's it. I'll link to that video if you haven't watched it yet. I did get ranty in that. The Home Edit Life, it was just a lazy book. Like, oh my God. It was basically a whole bunch of Instagram posts that have been published as a book. Like, why? Why are we doing this? Why are we charging people to reread all the Instagram posts? Hard pass from me. Next prompt, I rarely read this genre, but I love this book. So I very rarely read horror, but one of my favourite books of last year was Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. In fact, I talked about this in the tier ranking video too, but I honestly think that book is a work of art. Like, if you really pick it apart, if you really pay attention to it on a sentence by sentence basis, it is magnificently put together. It is beautifully written. There are so many layers, there is so much depth, there is so much nuance. It's such a creative piece of work. And even though typically I wouldn't be drawn to horror, and that's how this is predominantly shelved, I'm so glad that I read that book. So glad. And honestly, it was a cover buy for me. I bought it for I always buy myself a little stack of books for my birthday every year. And last year I bought myself Plain Bad Heroines, and it was entirely based on its striking cover. I didn't even know it was considered to be a horror book. I probably wouldn't have purchased it if I had known. But I am, like I said, so thrilled that I gave it a chance, because it became an all-time favourite. I 100% will be reading that book again multiple times in the future. I can already tell you that. It was just so good. So this isn't really a genre, it's more of a format, but I don't really enjoy typically short stories. And I know this is like a common thing of like short stories and essays, like it's hard to get as invested as you would with a full-length novel. And that's often been my experience. So even if I really enjoy the short story, I'm always left wanting more. Or like on the flip side, a lot of short stories that I've read have been very pretentious. I had to study a lot of short stories at university, and honestly, so many of them were just straight up wanky. But relatively recently, I've read 2 short story collections that I have loved. So the first one I listened to actually last year was Love in Colour by Bolu Babalola. And this is a collection of mythological retellings from mythologies from around the world, but they're all retold in like different time periods, in different locations, with women of colour as the protagonists. So there's a lot more like feminism and intersectionality brought into these like very well-known stories. And I just thought it was impeccably done. The audiobook was brilliant. I remember when I don't know if it was during a wrap-up or a vlog or something, but I remember talking about this on camera and trying to decide what my favourite story was. And it was honestly like, oh no, but actually it was that one. No, it was that one. It was this one. No, was it that one though? I genuinely couldn't decide because so many of them were so stellar. And even though I would have been entirely like grateful and happy to receive a full-length book on pretty much all of those characters, I still really enjoyed the shorter format. I thought they were very well done and felt very complete. So definitely recommend that. And then another short story collection that I've enjoyed recently, in fact, I say I've enjoyed it recently, I haven't actually finished it. I think I have 2 stories left to go in the collection, so I can't give you like my full analysis and favourite from that one. But that is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Filior. And this is one that I've heard a few people talk about now, but essentially it is telling the stories of different Black women who from the outside look like good church-going girls and women, but obviously on the inside they all have different things going on, whether that is in their romantic relationships, in their family dynamics, in just like with their personal struggles, with their sexuality, or with their dreams and desires. Like everyone has like this secret life behind the scenes, which is kind of the point. It's literally in the title, but it's so well written, it's so evocative. And one of my main complaints typically about short stories is you just don't feel like you get enough to care. But every single one of the stories that I've read so far, I genuinely care. The vibes are strong. I can feel the feelings of those characters and it's just impeccable. I managed to get an ebook of this and it's one of those ones that I want the physical copy so that I can read it again and again. I don't often buy like ebooks that I purchased as a physical book, but very occasionally I'll read something that is so good I just need to own it physically, and this is one of those instances. I love this trope, but I didn't like this book. So one trope that I love, and this is going to sound like freakishly specific, but I love this like girl returns to her small hometown where she was kind of an outcast, very unappreciated, didn't have the happiest upbringing, and has to face her past with like the infusion of like having slightly magical roots and having like food be a really important theme. So we've got like outcast, hometown, magical food related roots, typically set in the South, but it's not a requirement. Like, is that a trope? Like, can we call that a trope? Like, it's very specific. But I've read many books and loved many books that tick each of those boxes. One that I did not love was The Peach Keeper by Sarah Addison Allen, which was a big shame because I typically enjoy everything that she writes. I've read a few of her books and they've all had those vibes of being like whimsical and nostalgic somehow and just really a delightful time. But that one felt lazy, it felt chaotic, it was just an absolute mess. Like, I don't know what happened. I don't know how it got past the editor, got past the publisher, like what happened there. It did not have her usual magic at all. Another trope that I love is like gritty female detective in a man's world. Let's say gritty female detective with a tragic past, like that's like an extra layer to that trope in a male-dominated world. And a book that I did not like, books that I did not like were the books in the Katie Maguire series. And you might be wondering if I hated the first book, and I did, why I continue to read not just book 2 but also book 3. I cannot answer that question for you. I cannot answer that question for you. They were all awful. They were all offensive in so many ways. Like, what happened? So the Katie Maguire series by Graham Masterton, they're set in Ireland and they feature a woman called Katie Maguire, obviously, who heads up a police squad. So she's a detective of some sort and they're just awful. They are misogynistic, they are homophobic, they are racist, they like just all of the kinds of prejudice that you could squeeze into a narrative are in these books somehow. They're just not good. And like bearing in mind that these are from the perspective of a female detective, like she has such a male gaze, like who's buying that? Like, no, like you can tell these are written by a man and not a man who has ever met a woman, that's for sure. Don't bother, don't read them. Okay, let's move on to our next prompt because otherwise I am gonna get ranty. I hate this trope, but I love this book. So typically, I don't know if this really counts as a trope, but I don't typically love a really unbalanced power dynamic. I think that can be very toxic and it's something that is often used in romances and it always gives me a bit of the ick. But there are a couple of books that I've enjoyed that do have that about them, but they manage to handle it in such a way that it's still a pleasurable reading experience. So one of those was Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas. So if you've never heard of this book, it's kind of like the power dynamic that feels unbalanced is the man is twice her age, and like he's very wealthy. She's sort of staying in his house because she has nowhere to live, she has no money, and so that's where the lack of balance comes in. But having said that, their relationship does feel respectful and it does feel reciprocal, which is nice. Other book that I wanted to bring up that I enjoyed that has this trope is The Stopover by CJ Tudor. And in this, like, the lack of balance comes in from the guy is like a literal billionaire and the woman is sort of starting a job, like bottom rung of the ladder at his company. And I think the way that this is navigated works because they don't know who each other are when they meet. And they have quite a strong foundation of like chemistry and just getting along before they even realise that there is a sort of unbalanced power dynamic. And I think because of that, because they had that foundation, it doesn't feel like creepy and 50 Shades-esque. So those two I enjoyed despite them having that unbalanced power dynamic. Okay, next prompt. I love this author, but I didn't like this book. So I love Kennedy Ryan. Kennedy Ryan is an author I discovered this year. She writes romance. A lot of them are available on Kindle Unlimited. And I started out with the Grip series, which I adored. Like, they are all-time favourite, god-tier books. Again, like I read them on my Kindle and I'll be buying physical copies because I enjoyed them that much. And I've read some other of hers since that I also really enjoyed, but I didn't particularly like the Soul series or Blockshot. So the Soul series is like a 3-series book about like one couple, and then Blockshot is just one book about one couple. And yeah, I didn't particularly like, they weren't terrible, they were very well written because she's a great writer. I just happened to quite strongly dislike the male lead in both of those. So for that reason, I just didn't like, there wasn't that same amount of like magic and enjoyment as there was in some of the other things that I've read by her. But I know that that's just a personal preference thing, and it's more a comment on the men that I like in my books and in my life. So I'm not mad at her about that, and I will continue to devour everything that she puts out into the world multiple times, I'm sure. I also have similar feelings about Mariana Zapata. So I typically love her books, but there are a few that I've read that I just felt irritated by. So off the top of my head, Luna and the Lie, The Best Thing, and Dear Aaron, like they weren't the worst books that I've ever read, but in each of them, like at least one thing happened that really annoyed me. And it wasn't like a plot point that happened that annoyed me, it was like a writing choice thing that annoyed me. But again, because I've enjoyed her other books so much, I will continue to like work my way through her backlist and pick up any new releases. Okay, next prompt. I previously disliked a book by this author, but I loved this book. Okay. I'm gonna go with Forever Interrupted by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And it wasn't the worst book that I've ever read. It was just a bit blah, a bit forgettable. I didn't love the ending. Like, there were parts of it that just literally made no sense. Like, people just wouldn't act like that in those situations. And yeah, it wasn't the best. But I read that in January of last year, and then later on in the year I read 3 Taylor Jenkins Reid books that I absolutely loved. So I read Evidence of the Affair, which is a novella of, I think it's like one of those Amazon First ones, or you know, or Amazon Shorts or whatever they're called, something like that, but it's available on Amazon. I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and I read Daisy Jones at the Six, and I loved all 3 of those. All 3 of them are like 5-star books. Highly recommend. I'm glad that I gave her another chance. I love this cover but I didn't like this book. Okay, oh, I'm gonna say something controversial here. So I liked the cover, the Netflix tie-in cover of The Duke and I by Julia Quinn, which is the first Bridgerton book. Did I like the cover just because I love the show so much and the Duke is like literal artwork and I want to see him on the front of a book? Perhaps. But I did not enjoy that book. Like it wasn't the worst thing I've ever read. I had fun reading it, but objectively, it's a bad book. It just is. And then the other thing that comes to mind is Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Yang. I think the cover of that book is absolutely stunning, but the book itself just wasn't it for me. It didn't hit the emotional points that I was expecting based on what I'd heard said about it. It just didn't do it for me. It didn't do it for me. But the cover is stunning. And the cover of the sequel is also stunning, but I won't be picking it up because I don't continue reading series if I didn't enjoy the previous installment. I learned from my Katie Maguire incident. Then we have, I don't like this cover, but I love this book. So the first example that I have for this is Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. Like, this to me is a hideous book cover with absolutely no relevance. Why is there a Ferris wheel in the background? They literally never go to a fair or a Ferris wheel in the whole book. Like, it just doesn't make sense. I thoroughly enjoyed this. It's my favourite Colleen Hoover book that I've read, and I've read a fair few, but this cover does not do it justice. If I was shopping just based on covers, which is what I usually do, I would never have picked this up. So this definitely has to make the list. And then, so okay, this one, like the book that I'm going to show you is not the cover that I hate the most, because this is the anniversary edition, but Rachel's Holiday by Marion Keyes. So the original cover, it's a different shade of pink, so it's like a corally kind of pink, and there are like lime green flip-flops that are quite big on the cover. And I don't understand why flip-flops are associated with this book, because you look at it and you think, oh, this is going to be like a beach read. This is going to be about somebody who goes on holiday and has a romance, and that's not it at all. This is the story of somebody who like hits rock bottom with their addiction and has to be institutionalized to work through it. And yeah, that's not conveyed, like the depth of the novel is not conveyed by a pink cover with stupid flip-flops. It just isn't. And that's not to say that it's like really serious and dark and dense. It's not. Like, it tackles important topics, but it's very, very funny. But even so, like, why the flip-flops? And I will say, like, she does at some point wear flip-flops in the book, but it's not such an important plot point that I think it needs to be on the cover. So those are my two. And then the final prompt is to tag somebody. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say, if you enjoy the idea of doing this, tag yourself. That's what I always do. So I'll pop all of the prompts in the description box so that you can easily like copy paste and do that. But definitely come back and leave me a link to your videos in the comments so that I can come and give you some love. If you have strongly disagreed with any of the opinions that I've shared in this video, I want you to hit the comments and let me know. Let's start a bit of a discussion. If you like this video, by all means, give it a like. If you want to follow along for more eccentric uploads, then make sure you've hit subscribe, and I will see you very soon in my next video.